Good morning. It is just 11 o'clock now. We are going to start in a few minutes. We're going to allow just a few minutes for people to sign in. As we know, it takes a little bit of time if you haven't signed into a Teams event before. So we'll get started in just a few minutes.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to introduce myself. I'm Liz Morales. I am the director for the City of Tucson's Housing and Community Development Department. I wanted to share a little bit about what our department does before we get into the substance of our presentation, just so you, any of you who are not familiar with our department, just to understand what's the work that we do. Housing and Community Development is primarily funded by federal funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. You'll hear us refer to that department as HUD. And but we do get a small amount of general funds from the City Council as well. Through our department, we have two sides of our department. The first side is often the most well-known, which is the housing side, because we do public housing, where we own around 1,500 units. And we also do Section 8, which is about 6,000 vouchers, where people can use their assistance to help pay for their rent based on their income in privately owned rentals. The other side of our department is we call Planning and Community Development. And in there, we get federal funds to do programs that serve low to moderate income to the communities in the city of Tucson. One of the major funding sources is a community development block grant, which we call CDBG. We're able to do a lot of city projects. We're going to hear more about that, about what we do. But as an example, we do some parks projects, the 12th Avenue street improvements, bus stops, streets and sidewalks. But we also use those funds to also provide services to through our community partnering agencies. We also get a funding through a program called HOME, which is really around developing affordable housing, both home ownership and rental. We do a lot of work through the funding for homeless. We support shelters, we do homeless outreach, and we also help fund agencies who do services and wraparound supports for those who are experiencing homelessness. And through our city general funds, we use those funds to also support a variety of services, which we're going to hear some examples later in the presentation. And those are mayor and council supported programs, and we identify those through our human services plan, through the priorities that mayor and council have shared with us. So, you know, today is really about getting your input to help us update our plan. And we really want this plan to be broader and more impactful, so that we get not just community input, but we have a clear direction on how we want to invest our funds, in whether it's in people, in our communities, and in creating more homes for families. I want to thank the staff who worked really hard to get us to where we're at today. And I also want to thank you for being on this outreach virtual public forum, so that we can hear from you, because you are going to help us develop the strategies, the priorities, and with the blessing of the mayor and council, we'll be able to make a significant impact on poverty, on homelessness, and other things. So thank you for taking the time, for caring about your community enough to share what is important to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who will be able to carry this presentation forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. My name is Ann Schnecke. I am a Deputy Director here at the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I'm going to share my screen and do a short presentation before we get into talking about the specifics of the website and input tool. So again, I want to reiterate what Liz said in terms of thanking you for being here today. We have just, if you are new to the Microsoft Teams live event platform, we have a few tips. There is closed captioning, and that's available in both English and Spanish. So here is a picture to help show how to do that. You go to Settings, there's a Captions and Subtitles section, and then you can click on either English or Spanish. If there are people joining us online or on the phone who would prefer a Spanish-only version of this meeting in the future, please write that in the Q&A or text 520-403-1795. And Noemi, can you please translate?
Yes. Buenos días. Si hay personas que se unen a nosotros en línea o por teléfono que prefieren una versión en español de esta reunión, la próxima semana escríbalo en la sección de preguntas y respuestas o envíe un mensaje de texto al 520-403-1795.
Thank you. A few more tips. You can ask a question in the lower right in your corner, and feel free to do that throughout this presentation. And if you're joining by phone and you have a question, you can text 520-403-1795. Noemi, can you give that as well? All right, we'll move on from that, but please know if there are Spanish speakers that we will be taking questions in both English and Spanish.
Okay, sorry, I'm available now. Si se une por teléfono, puede enviar una pregunta por mensaje de texto al 520-403-1795 y alguien ingresará su pregunta en las preguntas y respuestas.
Thank you, Noemi. So here is an overview of what today's meeting is going to be. Right now we're doing introductions and meeting logistics. We will go into a little bit of a background on why we're doing the p-chip plan, and we'll talk more about what we envision the p-chip planning process to be. We will also do a brief demonstration of the website and talk about the public input tools. And we will have time at the end for Q&A, but as I said, feel free to put in your questions as we move along the presentation. So for those that are less familiar with the Department of Housing and Community Development and wanted to share a little bit of background that has led to why we're developing this p-chip plan. So traditionally, the department has developed a human services plan. For those on the phone, I'm actually going to read the top part of this slide. So this is straight from the last version of the Human Services Plan, which was developed in 2016 and goes through 2020. So in terms of human services, they are human service programs are targeted programs designed to meet a unique need that enhances the quality of life for program participants. Human services programs serve specific populations, including youth and families, the elderly, persons with disabilities, homeless individuals, and other vulnerable individuals in need. And so around every 5 years, the department has updated the Human Services Plan, and the Human Services Plan lays a framework of priorities, which then get incorporated into a request for proposals or RFP process to then allocate the funding. So we are now due to update the Human Services Plan. One thing about the Human Services Plan is that it directs some of the federal funding we receive, but it also directs some general fund dollars that mayor and council set aside for this purpose. In addition to the Human Services Plan, the department also develops a 5-year consolidated plan in collaboration with Pima County. What the 5-year plan is it's a requirement from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It's a requirement in order to receive certain federal funding. And you can see on the screen here that federal funding comes in the form of Community Development Block Grant funding, Home Investment Partnership, and Emergency Solutions Grant fundings. And those are a few of the types of federal fundings. So this is a required 5-year plan, and I'll say it's general in nature. It doesn't go into specifics, but it lays a foundation of how to spend our money generally. That plan was updated this past year. Mayor and council adopted it a few months back. And one thing I'll say about that plan is there was a lot of input into that plan to really develop the general framework on how the money should be spent. And so p-chip will build off of that. It will be consistent with the consolidated plan, but we're looking to provide more details in p-chip, and that's where we'll be asking for your input and your help. So you might be thinking, well, you have the Human Services Plan and the consolidated plan. Why would you need another plan? So there are a few different reasons for that. One is I mentioned that the Human Services Plan needs to be updated. So that is what lays out the framework for the general fund dollars. And so that is one reason. Another reason is in the spring, when there was input into the city's overall budget, one thing that was clear was how much interest there is in the programs and projects that housing and community development works on. So here's a word cloud from the budget tool from the spring. And when you take a look, you'll see a lot of words that are that relate to what HCD does. Things like fund community programs, affordable housing, homelessness, mental illness, racial equity. These are all key themes that came out of the spring budget cycle. And so with p-chip, what we're hoping to do is really look at those types of programs that the city funds and works on and really get input on how those dollars should be spent. You may be asking, okay, you keep talking about p-chip, what does that mean? So p-chip is the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. So this plan will look at people, meaning looking at how to help individuals and families, and particularly vulnerable individuals and families. Communities will look at neighborhoods and how to support our nonprofits and community partners. And then also homes, how do we ensure that we have decent, safe, and affordable homes for all Tucsonans? A few key things. We've talked a little bit about the HUD funding, and I will say I find the HUD funding to be a bit of an alphabet soup, confusing maze to navigate through. So there are different types of funding sources, and there are different requirements and restrictions for each of those funding sources. So throughout this plan, one of our main goals is to try to demystify the funding and really try to help provide transparency in what funding we receive and what it can be used for. One key thing that Liz had mentioned is HUD funds are intended to support low to moderate income individuals. And so that's a key theme when we're talking about people, communities, and homes. Please keep in mind that throughout all that, we're talking about low to moderate individuals and families. One last thing about the funding considerations, our general fund dollars are less restrictive, but they are very competitive, and we really want to make sure that we direct that funding to mayor and council key priorities. We are very early in this planning process, and so this may change over time. We're really interested in hearing your feedback on how we should develop p-chip and what sorts of things we should be considering. Right now, here's a slide that summarizes what our thoughts are. So on the left-hand side there, we're talking about inputs into the plan. So the purple one, I would say first and foremost, is community-centered. We do really want to hear what the community says. We talked about the consolidated plan and how that will need, p-chip will have to be consistent with the consolidated plan. We have mayor and council priorities, and all of these things work together. We will also be looking at data. The city has a few data initiatives underway, and we also know our community partners have done a lot of data gathering and analysis in the past. Similarly, same with the planning efforts. We know that there's been a lot of work done in the areas of people, communities, and homes. What we don't want to do is reinvent the wheel. So we'll be looking at pulling that all together, keeping equity centered throughout this process, try to provide more transparency, and eventually develop a plan that mayor and council will adopt. We have a very ambitious timeline to have this plan adopted, and there's two reasons for this timeline. I mentioned the 5-year consolidated plan that's a requirement of HUD. Another requirement is that is a more general document. Another requirement is an annual action plan that provides more specific information that needs to be submitted to HUD for us to receive our funding. That will need to be turned in the spring. And so we need to tell people what that is in the meantime. The other reason is we want to be responsive to our human service partners. So we have many organizations that do amazing work with the funding that we are able to allocate. We want to make sure we give them time to plan for what next year looks like. So our goal here is to have a draft plan by December, and then ideally in January have mayor and council adopt the p-chip plan, and then we will kick off the RFP process in January. And lastly, in terms of the presentation goes, we want to talk about public engagement and how those of you on the phone or online today that have tuned in can really help us with this plan. So thank you again for participating today and learning more. My ask will be that you get the word out within your audiences and help share this information on p-chip. So there'll be a few different ways in which people can provide information into the plan. We'll talk a little bit about the website next. We will have on the website right now is a public input tool, and given COVID and social distancing requirements, we think this is going to be one of the main ways that people can provide input into the plan. For those that are coming from human service agencies or affordable housing developers, we will be holding more specific stakeholder meetings to get more information from you on those particular areas. Online is a comment form, and that will stay up throughout this whole process. If there are questions or thoughts that people have, they can always put that on the online comment form. Our goal is to have a draft plan released in December. At that point, we will be asking people to make sure that the information we've heard is reflected in the plan, and we'll do another round of public meetings at that time. And so at this time, I'm gonna walk through, if I can switch my slide, if I can get this up. I'm gonna walk through the website really quickly. Okay, also don't forget that at any time, feel free to use the Q&A function. So here is the p-chip website. The URL is p-chip.tucsonaz.gov. At the top here is just an introduction to what the plan is. Here is the spot where you can sign up for email updates. We anticipate there will be about 3 or 4 times throughout this process that we'll send emails letting people know when, for instance, when the online tool, public input tool is closing, when the draft plan is up, when it's going to mayor and council. There is a short video to help introduce the plan, and that video is available in both English or here in Spanish. Here is where the section that provides the link to the public input tool, and we'll talk more about that in a second. This section provides an overview of p-chip and talks about the different focus areas, people, communities, and homes. This section here is intended to really help provide a greater level of understanding on what p-chip will result in. So in order to do that, you click on this square here, and it takes you to a separate page. That page walks through examples of the types of programs and projects that HCD has funded in the past, and those types of projects and programs are what we're talking about when we're talking about p-chip. So I'll walk through this page really quickly. Here's an introduction, and there's an arrow here, or you can also scroll to go through this. There's another introduction page here, and that's what gets the people, communities, and homes in the top right. If you didn't want to go through the whole story map, you can click to the different areas if you're interested in those specifically. There is an introduction for each section. This is the people. Talks about the outcomes we're hoping to see with the people focus area, and then provides a little more information about the types of funding and types of programs. And we actually get into examples of programs that have been funded in the past. For the people area, we have a program where a Merge Center Against Domestic Violence has received funding in the past to do some really great programs. We have SARSEF, Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona, Mobile Meals of Southern Arizona, and Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona. So those are the programs highlighted in the people section of this page. We then get into the communities section. So communities, there's an introduction talking about community development block grant funding and how it can be used to enhance our communities. Some examples of that: CDBG funds can be used to make improvements to parks, including pools. Here's an example of an accessible ramp, and so it can also be used to improve streets such as sidewalks, curb ramps, street lighting, etc. Here's an example of a public restroom at Estevan Park that was funded with CDBG funded. And then lastly, here is a picture of Dunbar Pavilion. And this is an example of where CDBG funds can be used to help nonprofits make improvements to their buildings. And so that is something that we will be looking at through the p-chip process, is how to support our nonprofits and make that funding available to building improvements. Finally, the home section of the plan. Here is more information about home and CDBG funding that can be used to support affordable housing, rental housing, and also home ownership opportunities. Here is an example of Desert Vista from Habitat for Humanity and SALT. We have West Point Apartments, which was a La Frontera project. And finally, we have Compass Affordable Housing is the final story here. So a few more things for the website, and then we're going to talk more about the public input tool and how to provide input. Here is information on the town halls, and this was last night's, here's today's. When we have future stakeholder sessions or future public meetings, this information will be replaced by that information. Here is the spot to leave comments, and that will be up throughout the whole process. And so at any time, if people have questions or comments, they can come and put that in. Here's the timeline that we talked about before. And finally, here's a section where you can learn more about the previous Human Services Plan and the current annual program funding that we allocate for our human service agencies. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Miller, who's going to walk through the public input tool and provide more information on how best to provide input into this process.
Thanks, Anne. Just unmuting myself and going to share my screen where we can start from the website that Anne was just walking us through. And again, we'll scroll back down to the public input section. So there's one button where you can take the public input tools in Spanish, and I'm going to use the English take the survey button. So that will open a new page in your browser and kind of take you to a separate page where you can scroll through all of the two different tools that we have in place. So as Anne mentioned, this is one of the big kind of community-centered inputs specific to p-chip that we're hoping that you can help us get the word out about, and also take yourself, anyone who's on this call. So we'll start with the priority survey. This is kind of big picture, helping us identify what are the key challenges facing low and moderate income individuals in Tucson, as well as giving some input on what are some creative solutions that we could fund through the p-chip process, and what are some of the priority low income populations that we should be focused on. So to go pretty quickly through, this first question asks you to rank what your top priorities are. And again, so you can choose one, you can choose 5, or you can rank all of them. All of that will be helpful information for us. You can provide some open-ended answers if we missed anything. The second main section is to provide some ideas for opportunities to address those challenges that you listed above. So what are the top 5 programs, services, neighborhood enhancements, or housing opportunities that you think would help solve those challenges? And if you've forgotten kind of what p-chip can fund, there are links above to see the story map or watch the video again just for a refresher. We are asking about whether we should be concentrated on spreading funds to some of the top priorities, or spread out across a wide range of projects, or maybe a combination of the two. And then this, if you've participated in a previous human services funding process, you might recall that we had some kind of categories for vulnerable low-income populations. So here's kind of your opportunity to provide input on that, if we should prioritize funding for certain populations. So this is a sort of dot budget exercise, if you will. So if you add a dot to children and youth, you'll see them go away here. You have 20 dots to spend. So you can go through and adjust as you see fit. And feel free to enter other populations that we may have missed, and provide some general thoughts on anything we've missed. We're also interested in knowing, you can select more than one here. So we're interested in knowing whether we're getting feedback from nonprofit agencies or community members or folks who are business owners associated with their neighborhood association. And this last section is demographic information. It's completely optional, but it helps us know if we're getting good representation from across the community, both from all sorts of demographic perspectives, including geographically with this zip code question. So you'll hit submit here, and this will probably turn white, so don't be scared. If you hit submit, it was accepted. And keep scrolling down to our budget tool, which you might recognize if you had participated in the citywide budget process. And it's a little weird at first. It took me a minute or two to figure it out. But basically we have three main budget sections here: people, communities, and homes, with a reminder of what we're talking about when we're talking about each of those categories. But when you click on each one, it will expand to show options for different programs and services that can be funded under each category. And you are welcome to add in how much of the overall total funding you would allocate to each of the programs. So I'm just selecting things at random. And you'll see here you can see your total allocation for people. And then go down to communities and say how much you would fund in each of these categories. And then go again down to homes, and I'm just gonna randomly make everything total to 100%. So here you'll be able to see that in total you already allocated 100%, and you can kind of scroll in between each different category and see your total allocation above. And when you're done, when you're happy with where things are, you'll scroll down and you can provide a statement kind of giving the rationale for why you funded certain things, or describing how, if you selected other, what you meant to be included in that category. And you can click on preview your budget or save and submit your budget, and you'll hit next, which I'm not going to do because that would save an additional random response. But so you'll click that, and then you're done with this section of the input tools. So with that, I'm gonna hand it off. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. We will now enter the Q&A section, and I'm going to turn it over to Liz in terms of the Q&A, but please put your questions into the Ask a Question function. One thing I'll say too is that with the public input tool, we will be putting out on social media a link directly to the tool. Again, we ask that you share that. On the website, we'll also put a flyer that you could download to share with folks that you have access to try to encourage them to take the survey and budget tool. So here is a question. So this is from Joe, and the question is about the budget, perhaps broader than p-chip. It sounds like the vast majority of your funds come from grants, federal HUD allocation, and only a small amount from the city's general fund. And I imagine that limits HCD's option to support our communities. Do you feel like given your broad mission around adequate, affordable housing and healthy communities, you've been given sufficient funding to succeed in that mission? If not, what would adequate funding for housing and community development in Tucson look like?
So, very good question. So, I think how we've used our funding around the idea of affordable housing, and in that, let's just talk about affordable housing. So, the home funds we get allow us to probably do 1 to 2 projects in support, as mentioned earlier in the notes by Marianne Bierling. We have been using our home funds for both LIHTC and LIHTC, meaning low income tax credit program, and non-low income housing tax credit program. So we use some of those, for instance, to help with down payment assistance. That's one way. On the low-income housing tax credit, it's used to provide a very low interest, easy terms for the development of rental housing. And so, you know, it is when we start looking at what's the housing needs, how much affordable housing, yes, it's grossly inadequate, the funding we receive. I would ask that you would watch and listen to the work that we're doing around a housing market study. We've done a couple presentations to HUD. And I'm going to ask Ann and the staff to put some of those links. At some point, we're going to have an analysis of what the gap is. What is the housing need? We know that the funding we receive is not going to be enough to be able to address the gap, to address the need for affordable housing. It really is going to take multiple efforts. One of the conversations I had yesterday with a HUD official that's out of San Francisco was the fact that there's opportunity zones, and we're starting to see a great number of investors investing into housing in some of these opportunity zones. So I'm hoping that part of the way that we address this is through private investment, and that there's enough incentive for investors to do that. But we don't know what that number is yet, as far as what would be the adequate number to ensure that we can provide not just affordable housing, but I think you talked about healthy communities. We know that there's a lot of need and services to really help raise our neighborhoods and communities into healthy, thriving communities. I don't know what that number is either. So I think what you're sharing there, Joe, is we definitely have probably more need than what a city government can do. But we know that we will continue to find ways to collaborate, work with our nonprofits, work with other organizations, and if we can just keep pressing forward, hopefully we can fill some of those gaps. But it's really hard to be able to really nail down what the amount of money that we would need in order to do that. So probably a long answer that did not answer your question, but I do think it's a great question, and we should always strive to try to do more.
Thanks, Liz. A couple more questions. One is, how long will the public input be collected? And I'm happy to take that one. So the public input tool will be accepting responses through the week of Thanksgiving. We'll be closing it that week, and we'll set a date soon. We'll be closing it that week because we really want to make sure we incorporate the responses into the draft that we'll be releasing in December. That said, we will still be taking public input throughout the process, so through that comment form, or as we move forward at any point, if people do want to give us feedback, I really encourage folks to give us feedback through different means. The next question is from Lisa, and she asks, this may have been mentioned at the beginning, but can you reiterate approximately how much money this process will help distribute?
So I'll jump in. One of the things that the p-chip document will be providing is an understanding what the amount of money that we receive, both in federal and general funds. It'll also show what will be committed and what's going to be available for application. We don't have those numbers readily available. Part of the reason is we don't have the congressional budget. It could be that they will fund us at the same levels as last year, but as we find out what that is, that'll help inform our document, which will share that. When we do go out for RFPs in early 2021, those numbers will be clearly provided. So as an example, on the general fund side, we anticipate we'll have the same amount of money, which is 1.4 million. On the federal side, that's on the CDBG and the home funds and ESG, that is a number we're not clear what those numbers look like. But one of the good things is we did provide on the website that Ann demonstrated is what did we fund in the last year. Again, we are going to expand some of those funding opportunities than what's there in last year's funding, but that at least provides a picture of what we funded in the past and how much.
Thanks, Liz. One thing I'll say too, as Liz indicated, we will be providing more detail in p-chip in terms of the funding sources and what that looks like. But in the meantime, a place to go look is the consolidated plan. It does provide an estimate of the annual federal funding that we receive each year. With p-chip, we hope to provide more details to that, but the consolidated plan does have numbers in terms of our federal funding. So next question, will the survey results be available to the public? If so, by what means? And so I'll jump in and say a couple answers to the question. First one is yes. We will provide a summary of the survey results in the plan, and we'll provide more detail in an appendix. The other thing I'll say is the platform we're using is called OpenGov. You can actually go in and we can provide information on how to do this. If you sign up for an OpenGov account, which is free and fairly easy to sign up, you can actually look at the survey results as they come in. So you can see for yourself exactly what the results of the survey are as we go through. So next question, besides sharing p-chip goals /survey, what else can citizens do to help p-chip goals? Great question.
And it sounds like Ann wants me to answer that. You know what, I do think there's continued conversations with, whether it's with us at the department or with your council representative and the mayor, just as you see things or you want to support certain initiatives, every council meeting has an open a time for people to share. That's always a great opportunity so that mayor and council knows where people are at as far as what they're seeing and what they are supporting. And then I would always say continue to support our community agencies who are doing a lot of this work. They come to us for funding, and if there's a certain area that really you're passionate about, whether it's serving children, seniors, homeless, find one of those community agencies where that you can support them directly, because we know all our agencies don't get enough funding to do the work that they do. So that would be my recommendation, but please always continue to use your voice to advocate and give us feedback as you see and hear things. So thank you for that question.
So I don't see, oh, wait, I lied.
Another one?
Great. So one question is, how are people who are homeless provided accessible, culturally appropriate mechanisms to participate?
So, there is some opportunities. We are the collaborative applicant. That's a role that the city of Tucson, we took on for the Tucson PEMA Council to End Homelessness. That is the planning body for our region to distribute and disseminate the federal funding around homeless programs. It's a separate body, even though we are the agency that oversees that process. It is not, we don't have control over that funding other than following the planning process, the application process, and the rating and ranking on that end. But I will tell you, there's probably, and I'm not the best person to answer this question, but there is probably mechanisms in order for them to participate. And I'm happy to get back to you, Steve, on that question, because I feel like I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly how that's done. But, it's really important to us that we are hearing that our services that we're providing and the network of resources, although also inadequate, is that it's being provided in the most culturally appropriate way. And so I think that's a really good question. I'm going to encourage, I don't know if Jody, you're on here, if that's something you would like to add to. She's one of our teams that oversees a lot of our homeless programming.
Hi, I am, and certainly through TPCH, that's a great way to provide input. We do have many people that are formerly homeless, that have lived experience, that are on the board and participate in the different committees. We're always looking for input from everyone in the community. We have a diversity and equity committee, and we're also looking at that on, in our community and how that affects the services that are provided. We have homeless outreach workers that are diverse, and they are out in the community in the washes and homeless camps providing services to people that are in need. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Jody.
Sure.
The only thing I would add to that too, Steve, is that if you have ideas on the best ways to do that, we would love to hear that from you as well.
And I'll take the next, just respond to Ryan Kelly talking about opportunity zones haven't incentivized the creation of more affordable housing in Tucson, but they have helped create over 4 million luxury condos. I definitely am not well versed on what has come out of the opportunity zones, and my reason for bringing that up was that the HUD official was encouraging us as a housing agency to get to work with investors to see how we can create some of those opportunities. So although you're very likely correct on the luxury condos, there might be some potential opportunities to see how we can have them invest and create housing that is affordable, and that they still are able to get the tax incentive that they're looking for. So I think it really was a charge to me to see how we can work more with the private sector and developing the affordable housing that we need, instead of just staying out of the conversation and letting them create whatever it is that would give them the most bang for their buck. So thank you for that. I definitely am interested in trying to curb that and trying to bring on more affordable housing.
So next question is from a staff member from one of the nonprofits asking, where or what tool would you recommend for a nonprofit such as us to make a plea of consideration for funding?
So the best way to, so as a nonprofit, I think all of our nonprofit partners, we really look to them to provide us input into this process through the tool that we're offering here through the surveys. We definitely does not need to be nonprofits, even though you're looking for a way to present your plea for consideration. I think also it's not uncommon, I know, for our nonprofit leaders to talk with their council members, the mayor and council, so that they know what are some of the needs out in the community. But use this tool and let us know that you're a nonprofit and what it is you're looking for. Or if you want to have a direct conversation with me and my team, we are always open and available to sit down and talk to any of our community partners to see where's the need that might help us understand how we can better serve, or at least ensure that that's part of the conversation. So direct conversations to me is always the best way if you're really trying to help us understand.
Okay, next question. What kind of follow-up is there to assess the success of projects that funds are used for? For example, the bathroom at Estevan Park has been locked and unavailable for use since before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Are there collaborations with departments like Parks and Recreation to troubleshoot and ensure that the services that are provided are being used?
So let's just talk about the bathrooms at the parks. That has been a question that has come up before in some other meetings. That decision on what bathrooms are available was a decision by Parks and Recreation a while ago. So those are not decisions based on they're based on funding and capacity of staffing. So and that definitely was done long before the pandemic. So I can tell you that that issue with the bathrooms is something that is in the realm of Parks and Recreation decision making. Now, as far as follow up to just evaluating the projects that are funded, we do have reporting requirements, and we do follow up on those. That's another area that Jody might speak better to as far as assessing the success of projects. Jody, would you mind?
Not at all. So for any of the agencies that we fund with federal funds or with general funds, agencies provide a scope of work after it's determined that they are funded through the RFP process. They work with our staff to develop a scope of work, and with that scope of work, there are performance objectives that are set. Agencies provide quarterly reports that we monitor and work with them to make sure that they are achieving their objectives. And then also at the end of the year, they provide a report to us with their objectives. So we're always looking at, have they performed and done the things that they set out to do? And if not, why? And those are considerations that are taken into account as we do the next request for proposal process, as well as if we amend contracts for a second year, we're looking at that as well.
Thanks, Jody. One thing I'll say with the p-chip planning process too, a couple of our principals are bringing more transparency and accountability for the funding, and so we are actually looking at using the website in terms of a way to communicate how the funds are being spent and trying to provide easier ways to access that information. So that's something we're looking at doing as we build out the p-chip plan. All right, Liz, here's another Opportunity Zone question. How would you hold those who utilize Opportunity Zone incentives accountable to continue offering affordable housing for the long term? Is there an enforceable plan to prevent them from taking the incentives and then raising rents, driving people out of urban areas?
So Trish, to be super direct, there is no way to hold them accountable. So that is a true concern when we're asking outside investors to do that. There is no way to ensure that that stays affordable. So that's why in the work that we do for housing community development projects that we do, we are ensuring long-term affordability of all our projects. So, you know, even with the low-income housing tax credit, those periods of affordability it could be 30 years, and after that point, it's not necessarily guaranteed they will stay affordable. So that is one of the drawbacks to some of these tax incentives, but they also do serve a short-term purpose. So I wish we could do more about that, but we can't. But that's why it's important that not just the city and the county, but we have Pima County Land Trust, the other land trust, I believe is called SALT. We have other agencies that are working on the long-term affordability piece. But yeah, the answer to your question is there's not anything we can do on that end because those are federal tax incentives that we are not involved with. And I see the next question for Faye. The best way to contact me, I'll give everyone my email address and I'll also put it in the chat here, is liz.morales@tucsonaz.gov. Definitely will give you my email over my phone number because voicemail sometimes is a little harder to get back to, but emails, I'm really good at that. So feel free to email me at any time.
Thanks, Liz. I don't see any other questions quite yet. We are nearing the noon hour, so want to do one more thank you to everyone who participated today, and thanks for helping us get the word out about this plan. All right, I still don't see any questions, but please know at any time, feel free to send in comments, questions, and thank you again. We'll wrap this up.
Thanks, everyone.